The danger is if you allow the government to determine what the discussion can be. It turns out that hate speech legislation, it's simply legislation that the government hates to hear. The government doesn't want to hear you talking about it, and therefore it can be determined hate speech.
So welcome back, everybody. I am here with Mr. Peter Casey, Irish businessman and former presidential candidate, and it's very good to speak to you today, Casey.
Welcome to Donegal.
So you grew up in a Catholic family of 9 in Derry, would I be right in saying that?
Yes, I was the eldest boy of 2 older sisters, but 9 children, yeah.
And that was in the 1960s that you would have been growing up, so you would have spent a lot of your formative years.
Well, the growing started in the 50s, but yeah. Formative years were in the 60s, yeah. I grew up in Derry at the height of the Troubles.
And so what was it like being a Catholic in Derry as a young man during that turbulent time of Irish history?
You were aware that there was discrimination against Catholics. You were aware that you couldn't get a job, if you were a male Catholic. There was lots of jobs in the shirt factories, but if you were a male in Derry, it was very hard to get a job. So, obviously at that age you weren't really conscious of the fact that men couldn't get jobs, but you just were aware that men didn't have jobs.
So then pivoting to your business life, you're obviously very successful and that takes a certain drive and mindset to achieve, but were you always this driven even when you were younger, or did that come later on? So for example, what did life look like for Peter Casey in his 20s?
I think ADHD is probably the technical definition of what I have, and totally unmedicated. So I always was doing something. I was always involved in things. So, my father taught us the importance of really hard work. He just was and my mother, of course, as well. Although you were never aware of the fact that your mother was working so incredibly hard to provide for all the children, but she just quietly went ahead and made it happen, But it was just, I think hard work is part of the family ethos, so.
And what would your first business venture have looked like then?
Selling rubber bullets. We used to go down and riot after school and put on the Parker jacket and you'd throw stones, and there was sort of honour among thieves. Whoever got hit with the rubber bullet would be given it, if you didn't get it yourself. But and there was good money in actually selling rubber bullets. And then of course demand supply took over and the price went down and down. But at one stage you were able to get £5 for a rubber bullet.
Janie Mac and that back then would
that was a lot of money, and then went plummeting downwards, as the demand supply increased.
So being as successful as you are, usually the thing that would motivate people is money, when they're making a big decision in life. That tends to be kind of impetus for a career move, shall we say, but you don't really want for anything. So what motivated you to run for the presidency in 2018 exactly?
I always said that I told my mother when I left to go to Australia in 1981 that I would be standing for the president, and it was a little bit of almost a family-in joke, Peter's going to stand for the presidency. I mean, I always believed that there was a great opportunity for the president to make a difference, and when I went to Australia and saw the powerful diaspora in Australia, and of course in the United Kingdom as well, I was 6 years in the UK. I really felt that if the president could unite the diaspora around the world, there's almost 75 million more people than in the United Kingdom. If we could tie that diaspora together, I felt that it really could be a voice that would make a difference in the world. And we get invited to the White House once a year on St. Patrick's Day to give a bunch of shamrocks to the president. We could influence the president to do so many things by saying, look, we've got 40 million people here in America that are, and of course, over half the American presidents claim Irish heritage, so we have a good starting point there,
So you think that Ireland's presidency is kind of underused then in terms of the impact that it could have on world politics?
Oh, without a doubt. but not just in world politics. Starting at home, there's a massive opportunity for the president to make a difference. So the president, can be the microphone for county councils around Ireland and turn up at a county council meeting. I mean, to my knowledge, I don't think any president has ever turned up at a Donegal County Council meeting. But if a president turned up at a county council meeting and said, what's on your mind, folks? What's happening? Or if he came up to Donegal and put his finger in a mica crack of a mica house, there would be more attention focused on mica. So the president, under the Constitution, is not allowed to say anything contrary to the policy of the government. But there's nothing to stop him from turning up at a county council meeting and offering his microphone essentially to the county councillors.
So a lot of people have speculated that Bertie Ahern may be gearing up for a presidential run following his return. He's receiving honorary doctorates from DCU, and he's generally doing whatever he can to stay in the news cycle, it seems. So do you have any thoughts on a potential President Bertie Ahern?
I think that Bertie should have been charged for crimes. He should have been investigated by the tax department of the Inland Revenue. He had money that he couldn't account for, and that is a reason why the tax department should have investigated him, right? Now, I just feel that, for a Minister of Finance not to have a bank account, to say that the money that was in his bank account came from winning it on the horses, it's disingenuous, and I don't think that it's appropriate for somebody who's the president of the country to turn around and say, I won the money on the horses.
Do you fancy his chances? Do you think there's an electorate out there that would be willing to support him?
I don't think he is. Obviously he'll get on the ballot, and I think that I don't think he'll win. I think that people are tired of cronyism, tired of traditional politics, tired of the political parties rolling out their candidates and just saying, anoint this person. I think people are looking for more in their president.
Well, speaking of traditional politics, your run in 2018, there was nothing traditional about that. And one of the things that fascinated me about the way you shot up to second place in such a short period of time, you got more than 3 times the vote share of the next person on the list. You completely blew everybody behind you out of the water. And in my view, you did that by riding a wave of controversy, because from what I could tell, all you said was that you don't think travelers should be treated as a separate ethnic group, and that the traveling community shouldn't get special treatment or privileges over any other Irish citizen. Would I be correct in saying that?
Absolutely. The proclamation says, cherish all of the children of the nation equally. It doesn't say cherish this section more equally than the other section. It says cherish all of the children equally, treat all of the children fairly and equally. And I think it was totally wrong, and I still think it's totally wrong, that they allocated 150 million towards housing requirements for a section of the community that they didn't even define what a traveller was. And I've travelled more than any traveller you'll ever meet. I've travelled over 10 million miles, And when I went down to Turles to meet with the leader of the travelling community, she wouldn't meet me because her name was Margaret Casey. So, we're all travellers. And I think it was totally the wrong message to send to a section of the community, to say that you're different and to say that you're going to be treated differently. Because there are people who are struggling to pay their bills, struggling to actually work out how their children will be able to stay in the same general geographic area because they can't afford to live in the same area as their parents. And then we're sectioning off a certain part of the community who we haven't actually defined what the definition of a traveller was. I'm saying we're going to give them 150 million towards giving them wonderful houses that they were turning down because they wanted an acre of land and 2 stables per house. So it was just wrong.
And I think there's a lot of people who would agree with you in that. I mean, evidently there must be, because of the result you got at the election. The fact that I think you got 300,000 votes or something like that.
347,000, yeah.
But he's counting.
700.
Do you think there was an element of people saying, I'm glad there's a candidate who's saying what a lot of people probably think but would be too afraid to say for fear of political correct consequences, or the fact that you took such a hiding from the media and you were still unapologetic and you said, no, this is my view and I'm sticking to it?
Yeah. When things just took off, people would ask me a question, what do you think of this situation or that situation? And I just say what I thought. And by and large, it was, I think resonated with a lot of people.
We know that in Ireland there are a lot of ideas that it's kind of unacceptable to discuss from, again, the perspective of political correctness. And I think we have a very stifling culture today in Ireland as far as the Overton window, or the range of acceptable topics of discussion. And now, of course, that's even spilling over into legislation, where we're looking at potential hate speech laws, where if the government deems that something you said is quote unquote hateful, which is subjective, I mean, who knows what that means, that you could actually be prevented from saying X, Y, or Z. Do you think you would even be allowed to run the campaign that you ran if those laws were in place?
Well, whether I would be allowed to or whether I would are two different questions. I mean, I would still run the same campaign. I might end up in jail, but I would certainly, it wouldn't stop me from running the campaign, the way that I feel. I feel that this legislation, on theory, it makes a lot of sense, but where the problem comes in is the way that the adjudication as to what is a definition of a hate crime. It's from what I can understand, it'll be left up to the Garda Síochána to actually determine whether or not it's a hate crime, and therefore, if you're walking down the street and I attack you and steal your wallet, then I get a certain penalty for that. But if it's determined that I attacked you because, you were gay, then I would then get my sentence doubled.
Do you think that Ireland is at risk of shutting down important conversations just because the people expressing certain ideas have an alternative view?
I do. I really feel that, the way societies evolve is through positive interaction, positive discussions, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's by having discussions that we progress. People are now afraid of making any statement at all in Ireland because they'll be labelled a racist, and it's wrong, and what makes it worse is, though, that the government is the one who decides what the determination is. So it gives the government the ability to completely lock down conversation and discussion on important issues, And it's like, we were all locked down for 2 years, for goodness sakes, with COVID. You couldn't go and hold the hand of your 60-year-old partner, because the government said you couldn't. And it's now turned out that all this was unnecessary, by and large, it looks like, So, I mean, the danger is if you allow the government to determine what the discussion can be. It turns out that hate speech legislation, it's simply legislation that the government hates to hear. The government doesn't want to hear you talking about it, and therefore it can be determined hate speech, So that is the concern. A healthy society needs to have lots of positive discussions and open discussions. And this whole transgender thing, discussion that's gone on at the moment, that needs to be discussed. So I think, one of the powers of the presidency is the power to pardon, and to my knowledge, there's only been one pardon granted. That was a posthumous pardon, But the president has the ability to give a pardon to any crime. It's totally at his discretion, and it can't be challenged. So, if, for example, this hate crime legislation were to become effective, the president could turn around and give a pardon to anybody who he felt was wrongly prosecuted, and it's amazing that nobody really understands the power that the presidency has.
Do you think that, during COVID, there were a lot of restrictions that were implemented that many people feel were unconstitutional? For just off the top of my head, the ban on religious services, for example, many people say that might have violated a certain article. And there were private citizens who tried to raise money for a constitutional or a Supreme Court challenge, and it was this big, arduous process, and it never really panned out. Whereas obviously the president has the power to refer.
That's a very good point. The president, anybody who was charged, for example, with a COVID-related offence, the president could grant them a pardon. So the president could have knocked the whole thing on its head. He could have turned around and said, "I'm going to give that person a pardon." And all they'd have to do is give one pardon, and that would cause the government to suddenly think, whoa, we need to rethink this. He doesn't have to go around issuing lots of different pardons. All he has to do is give one pardon, one well-anointed pardon, would actually get the government really thinking, wow, we need to think about this. And it would create discussion on it. Now, the president he doesn't have the ability to go against government policy. He can't turn around and say the COVID laws are wrong, and he can't do that. But he can give someone a pardon if he breaks them, and he could have, and it would have made the government sit up and think. And that's where I think we've, look, in fairness, I think Michael D hasn't rocked the boat, but unfortunately we needed somebody to rock the boat. We actually needed somebody to rock the boat and get the government to stop forcing this. COVID is the best example of where the president could have made a difference. He could have made a huge difference, and he didn't.
We've heard that just this week, President Michael D. Higgins weighed in on the ongoing sex education debate in Ireland, where school children are being taught about gender ideology and the idea that there are more genders than just male and female. In fact, Regina Doherty, who's a Fine Gael senator, she's the leader of the Seanad, she actually said just last year that there were about 9 genders. And she never listed what those 9 genders are.
Well, when next time you're talking to her, ask her which one of the 9 she is, I think the danger is that you're going to, you're depriving children of just, you're loading them up with too much clutter of things to worry about and think about. And am I transgender? Am I lesbian? Am I gay? Just let them get on with life, and then help them, support them when they make that. But don't be forcing it down their throats at like 10 or 12 years of age. It's just far too young.
So you think that it'd be better to just let kids kind of figure out their own gender identity and sexual identity?
Have support there. Have support mechanisms in place, when people... But don't be teaching a child that if you don't know what a transgender is, or if you don't know what a lesbian is or a gay person is, it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you wrong. Just let children grow up at their own pace and don't sort of force it down their throats,
Now, one of the issues that it's unacceptable to talk about, quote unquote, today in Ireland is immigration. And that's a big issue on the agenda for a lot of people. As we've seen from polling, it's kind of creeping up there as far as issues that are on people's minds, as we've seen a huge influx of asylum seekers to areas like East Wall and the subsequent protests and so on. Do you think that Ireland's migration system is working as it currently stands?
The answer to that is no, because like we had over 10,000 people come into Ireland illegally last year, so 10,000 people jumped the queue. The people that are coming in illegally, the people that, put their passports down the toilet once they get onto the plane, and then claim asylum, those people should be, asked to leave, because they're jumping the queue. You have to have some form of order and some form of, otherwise society, degenerates into chaos, if you don't have some sort of order.
What do you think of the government's policy where they generally ask people to self-deport once the determination has been made that they don't have the right to remain in the country? This according to the Director General of INISH, the Irish Immigration Service, Michael Curran. He told an Oireachtas committee meeting that the onus is generally on the person to self-deport and that they also don't have exit checks.
Well, that's just basically the government giving up their responsibility. It's the government's responsibility to self-deport. They should deport, not self-deport. It's the government's responsibility to protect the borders. If you don't have borders, you don't have a nation state. You cannot be a country, and I'm very proud to be Irish. I'm very proud to have my Irish passport. But if you don't have borders, you can't be a nation state. So now on a bigger picture, though, the world needs to be more generous towards the poorer countries. I mean, the reason that people are risking their life and limb, to get to a better life, is because they look on their, they can see now what it's like to be living in Ireland, or they can see what it's like to be living in America if you're in Latin America, South America, and we as a society need to be more generous towards the poorer countries in the world. The reason people are leaving these countries is because they want a better lifestyle for their children. And if they had a better lifestyle where they were, they wouldn't be trying to leave in droves, to get into America or to get into Europe.
I was speaking to a gentleman, Sean Deegan, who was, he's a retired barrister now, but he was on the Refugee Appeals Tribunal back in the early 2000s. He was appointed by then Justice Minister. He said that he was of the view that many of the most needy refugees were actually back in their home countries because they didn't have the money to pay a human trafficker or to pay somebody to actually get them out.
The tragedy of our generation now is human trafficking. There are just absolute scumbags that are offering and promising people, we'll get you to Ireland, or we'll get you to Europe, or we'll get you from Colombia to New York, and they're promising them promises that they can't fulfill, and they're getting people to sign over their properties, sign over the deeds to their houses, sign over, and people will do it because it's the only chance they have of getting out. And that's where, the real tragedy of this migration is, the fact that we are encouraging traffickers, and anything that we can do to stop the power of the traffickers, I'm totally in favour of,
What role do you think the European Union plays in all of this? Because whenever a government minister is confronted on Ireland's immigration policy, they always seem to fall back on our quote-unquote international obligations, of course referring to various EU treaties and things like that. So do you think that the EU plays a part in this?
Well, you look at the EU, Ireland would be, obviously the countries around Ukraine, like Poland, and they've obviously taken in huge numbers of people. But Ireland has taken in a very large number of Ukrainian, for example, refugees. But like Britain, we've taken in 71,000. Britain has taken in 82,000. And they're 12 times bigger than we are. Yet they have only taken in 10,000 people more than we have. So I don't know the actual numbers for France and Italy, but I would have to think Ireland is probably per capita, probably one of the highest, and at a time when we have a housing crisis, we have a healthcare crisis, we're really putting our shoulder to the wheel.
Our political classes are obviously remarkably pro-EU. Leo Varadkar has said that, quote, Ireland is on Team EU. And Micheál Martin said several years ago that Let there be no doubt about where Ireland stands. We want nothing to do with a backward looking idea of sovereignty. We are absolutely committed to the ideals of the European Union. Are you as optimistic about Ireland's relationship with Brussels as they are?
I think it's very important that we have a very positive relationship with the EU, right? But I also am a realist. I mean, the vast majority of our taxes come from American multinationals, and our biggest trading partner is the United Kingdom. So, yes, it's important that we have a good relationship with the EU. I don't think it's necessary that we have to sell out our heart and soul and our whole nationalism and our whole concept of what it is to be Irish, to be part of the EU. I think that, it's, as I say, our biggest taxpayer are the American multinationals, and our biggest trading partner is the United Kingdom. So yes, let's have a very important relationship with the EU. Would I be open to, say, leaving the EU? I would be open to a discussion on it, because I think we should have done what our biggest trading partners are doing. We should align with America and align with the UK. But that we can be like Norway, have a wonderful relationship with the EU, pay into the EU kitty, but don't have to give up your shopping day.
What would you say to someone who argued that the EU has been good for the Irish economy and our industries, and that we've seen a big increase in the standard of living since we joined the EEC in the 70s?
Everyone, whether they joined the EU or not, has had an increase in their standard of living. That's what happened in the world since the 70s. I don't think there's probably hardly any country in Europe that had a standard of living decline since Ireland joined the EU. Yes, we did get a lot of funding out of the EU originally, but don't forget we gave up we had 17.5% of the fishing rights for Europe, and now we're down to like 2%, whatever. So we give up billions and billions of our fishing rights. I don't just take it as it's all been one-way traffic. Yes, there's been benefits, absolutely, but there's also been a lot of negatives as well. So I think you can have a healthy discussion about whether Ireland should stay in the EU or not stay in the EU without being labelled a racist or a Euro skeptic or whatever. I'm skeptical about everything.
The EU obviously directs a lot of Ireland's energy policy due to the government's various climate targets and commitments, and a lot of these are very controversial. Actually, Michael O'Leary of Ryanair fame recently called on Eamon Ryan to resign because of his handling of the transport sector and the energy sector and things like this. So as a businessman yourself, what impact do you think that these green policies have on industry?
Well, it just blows my mind that people don't understand that carbon tax is a regressive tax. It taxes the poor people more than the rich people. The nurse going to the hospital, the teacher going to the school, those people they can't turn around and say, okay, well, I'm not going to put diesel or gas into my car, petrol into my car today, or I'm going to take a bike to work, So it's so much hypocrisy and nonsense. Carbon tax does not work. Carbon tax is a regressive tax, taxes the poor people more than the rich people. The guy that's flying his Learjet doesn't care less about the cost of the fuel, and so, he doesn't care less about it. And if you are struggling to feed your children, struggling to pay all your bills, the last thing you want to do is, I'll go and put in retrofitted windows in my house and get 60% rebate for my new windows. I'm sorry, I'm trying to feed the children, put shoes on their feet. The last thing I want to do is re-insulate the attic or put new windows in.
So what would you say to someone who argued that because climate change is such a pressing issue, Ireland has to do our part, otherwise we're here by the sea?
Biggest load of nonsense. You've got now, like the Irish government is now looking to cull a third of the suckling herd so that, because the methane, the farting cows, and the cows will be basically bred in Argentina, and we'll cut down some rainforest to make pasture land, and then we'll slaughter the cows, put them on a container ship, freeze them, send them all the way back to Donegal again, and then but they'll be farting in Argentina just the way they were farting here. So it doesn't make the slightest bit of sense at all.
do you think when it comes to the turf issue, obviously the turf ban was very controversial, and there were Fine Gael TDs telling Eamon Ryan that it was so unpopular in rural Ireland it could even bring down the government, and that's one that obviously we import turf as well from Estonia and Germany and places like
Yeah,
that.
I saw that. Yeah, you know, the whole concept of global warming is, people are saying that, we have to be very concerned about global warming. And yes, I mean, I look outside and I see the water levels seem to be going up. But we're living on a planet where, about a third of it is ice we can't live on. And there's, you've got the 25% of desert you can't live on. We need to come up with some way of getting the ice melted and get it onto the deserts. So I have a great belief that we will come up with solutions. And I don't subscribe to this nonsense that the world is on fire and that we're all going to, our children will not have anywhere to live. We might lose a few polar bears by melting some of the ice caps. Fair enough. I'm sure we'll come up with some way to save them. But, at the end of the day, we need to melt some of the ice and we need to get the deserts with water on them. And I'm a great believer that we will come up with solutions to it, and so I'm very optimistic about the fact that the world will come up with solutions to any problems that we come up with.
Thank you so much, Peter. Really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.